In today's tutorial, I'm going to share my process for painting with acrylics, and we are going to paint some peonies. Hey friends, welcome back. My name is Shayda Campbell, and around here we make art and it's fun, not scary. And today I am finally sharing another acrylic tutorial. We did one last year. I've had lots of requests. I've been working on my acrylics. I'm still figuring it out. So today I'm gonna share what I can with you. There are definitely some parts of this where I'm like, now just play and mess with it a bit. And that's where I'm at. But I hope that you can learn along with me and that me not being an expert will actually encourage you to take the plunge and maybe do something a little scary, because that's how this feels for me right now. So let's jump right into it. To start, here's what my desk setup looks like when I'm working with acrylics. I've got my paints, so I've got some heavy body golden acrylics and then the Liquitex acrylic gouache. So basically a heavy body and a thinner, more liquid acrylic. I just like mixing both. I've got a couple glasses of clean water, an old tray, some paper towel for wiping my brush on, and then I like to put a piece of parchment paper on top of the tray. The paint stays wet so much longer and doesn't dry out. I've got a little 8x10 canvas board. I just get packs of those on Amazon. I've got my peonies, and I'll put a shot of the vase, how I'm seeing it, up on the screen. But I've got a beautiful antique picture filled with summer peonies, and I'm going to be painting from life. Now we're going to start with the Liquitex acrylic gouache in burnt sienna. The color that you choose for the sort of underpainting is totally up to you. A lot of people will use this sort of sienna color, but I've also done it with red, I've done it with Payne's gray. It just depends. It really gives the canvas a nice warmth so that your colors, when you start layering on top, don't look flat. It also helps the canvas to absorb the paint, to take the paint a little more nicely. Once that is done, I just mix it with water. I start working out a sort of sketch. And the nice thing about sketching in paint is that it's really easy to do over if you don't like it. So you see I take a wet paper towel and I kind of lift where the big, brightest flower is. Then I'm using the more concentrated paint to paint in some of the darker pink peonies. And really I'm just making like a messy circle. And this one is quite light, so I'm going to sort of take that paper towel, create the highlight, and then you can also use a wet brush to sort of paint lighter, if that makes sense, to make a highlight. There's this big petal falling away, so I did that by painting with water. Then I've grabbed some more acrylic gouache, and I'm sort of putting in the stems. Then I'm using water again and marking that big bud that is sitting up on the top right. And finally, I'm taking the paint and putting in the vase. And now I can see that actually the whole thing is too far down. There was just way too much negative space up top. My vase looked really small. So what did I do? I just take a wet brush and a bit of paint, and I just wipe the whole canvas and restart. It's so easy. It's almost like working on a chalkboard. And that gives you the freedom to say, like, that's not perfect, let's just do it one more time. Not a big deal. And I think that's really nice, because the last thing you want to do when you're doing a larger piece like this is start from a place of a mistake. It's the same thing when I'm knitting. You don't want to begin a large project with a little flaw, and you just sort of, it gets bigger and bigger as the project continues. If that vase looked weirdly small, the final painting is just going to look unbalanced. So doing the whole thing over again with painting with water, using paper towel to lift, and using the acrylic gouache in a more concentrated form to mark out the rest of the painting, the darker flowers, the stems, the picture. And yeah, the whole thing comes together really nicely. And the nice thing here is if I needed to wipe this again, I could. It would not be a big deal, and I would just start over. So that's the main image, the flowers, the vase. I'm going to put like a little line of desk back there, a little shadow, and that's it. At this point, I want to get some paint on the canvas and start mixing my colors to begin this painting. So I'm using ultramarine blue, a little bit of yellow. I love to mix a little teal into my greens. I've got a little yellow ochre, magenta and red, and of course a white for the peonies themselves. But let's begin with the leaves. So I'm using ultramarine and a little bit of yellow, and we're mixing up a nice medium green. And I'll start with quite a dark medium green and just paint in those leaves. I just do very sort of easy brush strokes. The thing about the way we're going to paint this today is we're just going to approach, we've sketched the shapes, we're looking at the vase, and then we're just going to paint them. And how much detail you add is kind of up to you, but you can't do a bad painting when you're painting in this style, where you start with the underpainting and then you just, get into it and paint the shadows and paint the colors. You could have a very basic painting that lacks detail, that's a little more primitive. I really love that style usually. Or you can do a lot of detail and you can do some mixing right on the canvas so that your paints look very rich, but that might not be your style. A lot of this is just about finding your own way, finding your own style. What looks good to you? What do you like? It's not about good or bad. So if you can kind of get the idea of good, bad out of your mind. We did our little underpainting. We know where the dark side of the picture is and the light side. Now I've mixed a little gray. This is a mix of Payne's gray white and like a brown, like a Van Dyke brown. And I just put in, a lighter bits and some darker bits. And you can see there's a bit of a highlight on the left as well as the right. So we're just filling in, almost like a coloring book. It's light over here, so we're gonna add a lighter paint. It's darker over here, we're gonna add darker. And then from there, you can decide how much detail do you as a painter really care to incorporate, but you cannot actually do a bad painting. So I decided to use a nice light sort of gray blue for my backdrop. This is a mix of white and ultramarine with a bit of Payne's gray so that it's not too bright. And I'm just taking a tiny filbert brush, a medium-sized filbert brush, and I go around all the flowers in the vase. And then I did like a nice beigey color for the desk or the table. This is a bit of white with brown and the yellow ochre. So you get to choose those colors as well. I love doing sort of a pink background. I of course do lots of beiges and grays and whites. This one with the bright pink peonies, I just thought blue would be so pretty, and it's looking really, really nice so far. The thing about painting in this style, and any style, is that it's up to you how much you abstract, right? So here I'm adding a little bit of a shadow. I've just put a little more brown and gray into that mix that I used for the table, and it gives a nice darker color that's not too far off of the color of the table. But it's up to you how much you abstract. And abstract doesn't mean non-objective. Abstract means looking at an object like a picture filled with peonies and asking yourself, how much do you want to change it? How do you want to represent it? Because I'm not representing it in like a super heavy realistic manner. I'm not into super realism. I like to stylize with my watercolors, with my brush pens, with my acrylics. So I like things that look a little wonky and lack a little bit of detail and look a little playful. So do you see what I mean? There's no bad painting. There's only choosing how much detail you want to incorporate. And once you've done the underpainting, you just start and get in there and paint the highlights and paint the shadows. And decide, do you want really bright colors? Do you want more muted colors? All these little decisions you as the artist get to make. Now for my peonies, I'm using a mix of magenta, a little bit of that burnt sienna, a lot of white, little hint of yellow sometimes, just so the pinks aren't too cold. And so to begin these peonies, you can see I'm just saying like, okay, these are the two peonies, the one in front and the bud up to the top right that are quite light. The others are a little darker. So if I just get those first, colors and forms in, then from there I can play. And now I'm starting to add like a few messy curving brush strokes, not all that different than we do with watercolor, to kind of show that there's all these layers and layers and layers of petals. But we're not gonna paint every layer. We're not gonna paint every detail because, as I've said, I don't usually go for that high realism. What we are going to do instead is get a couple different colors of pink mixed up, and you can see that on the right on the parchment. I've got some really light pinks, some darker pinks, and I am just going to make these messy brush strokes, sometimes a bit more of a curving brush stroke, sometimes just a hit, a whack of the brush on the flower, and I'm going to start hinting at the idea that there's layers and layers of petals. I'm also smoothing out the shading on the picture a little bit, working with a medium gray and a lighter gray, and just kind of getting the shadows, the shapes of the shadows and highlights. Instead of looking at the shape of the picture, I'm looking at the shape of the bright areas and the shape of the dark and trying to capture those. And I'm not even trying to blend them particularly well. I like it to look a little painterly. I like to see the brush strokes. Then we'll put that on pause for a minute, and I'm going to mix a lighter green, and we are going to paint in the stems that sort of sit in front of those dark leaves that we first put down. We're also going to add some lighter green to some of the dark bits that are already there, and it just gives us a nice mix of leaf and stem and shadow. And I usually just mix a little extra yellow into my greens. It's not usually a good idea to add white. And I put a few touches of green kind of in between some of the flowers to hint at leaves and foliage being back there. Working on the picture again, just trying to paint the shadows and paint the highlights and get the shape. And then what I'm going to do is start using like just white to put the really, really highlighted areas. And on a picture like this, you'll get like just little spots that have a little touch of white. With that done, I'm going to grab a bit of blue and just put a few blue spots in and amongst the green and pink so that it doesn't look like it just looked a little too flat having it all be green there. I want it to look like the light is coming through the flowers or the background you can see. And that led me to making the black background like a little bit more blue in some spots. At some point, you're going to see me kind of go down the rabbit hole with this piece, and I'm just doing the part that I call like messing with it. And I'm mixing up some darker pinks, and I'm adding some more brush strokes and curving lines and little bits to the flowers, just working it until I get it looking the way I like. What I can recommend for this is working from life. Go to the grocery store, get some flowers for $10, put them in a jar, a vase, whatever, and just look, put them next to a window and really look for the highlights, look for the shadows, and try to capture them. And remember, it's not about realism. It's not about getting every detail. It's about painting shadow and light, and you get to decide how much detail you really want to capture. And for me, obviously, this is not realism. We're doing this kind of fun interpretation of the vase of peonies that is sitting in front of me. So yeah, I'm just messing with it. I changed the background a little, which now it's a bit more bright blue towards the bottom, which I really like. I'm working on the peonies to get the look of all the color they contain. It's just amazing when you really look at something, you begin to see the color that is contained within it. It's not just pink. There's purple in the shadows, there's peach, there's gray, there's red, there's burgundy. So this is the messing with it. But the nice thing is I'm just making brush marks. I'm not drawing. I'm not trying to draw or paint a peony. I'm just laying down like wax of paint on the canvas and just seeing how it goes. And I'll change them and I'll mess with them and I'll play until I get to a place where I feel good about what I've created. With all that said, I realize this tutorial is not a straight shot. Here's how to get from blank canvas to perfect peonies like some of the watercolor or illustration tutorials are. This is a tutorial where I'm still in my learning phase and I'm sharing what I can. I hope you appreciate it. And if all you get out of this is that you don't have to, draw perfect peonies, then that's my job is done here, because you as the artist get to interpret things the way you want to. Now, here's my favorite part of this painting. I always choose these antique pitchers and vases that have like a painting on them because I love recreating that. So I mixed a little bit of my ultramarine acrylic gouache, very, very liquid, with a bit of Payne's gray. So I've got this nice dark navy color. I also put a lot of water in there. So I'm using a very sort of light, watery paint, almost glaze-like. and you can see me just lifting a little bit as well as I go, and I'm going to paint these abstracted flowers and leaves. So here's another chance for you to work on your abstraction, because I haven't captured the peonies in their entirety in a realistic way. I certainly don't want to capture the vase with too much realism, so I'm just hinting at the idea of this painted porcelain with these sort of messy roses and leaves, and I'm almost scribbling a rose, and it's just a bunch of curving brush marks, and I lift a little bit of the paint to give me that sort of brushed away messy look. You can do that process of lifting as many times as you like, and then come back in with some more light watery paint and keep doing those curving brush strokes and making little markings for the leaves. And your leaves can be quite messy, and in fact, sometimes I just do little curly Q lines, thin little lines. You'd be surprised how far that goes towards creating a really pretty porcelain design. And friends, when I've completed this piece, I will be listing it for sale. I'm actually doing a local community art market here in where I live, Stratford, Ontario. It's every weekend and on some Wednesdays, weather permitting. So I go and sit down there and paint, and I sell my original work. So if the weather is good this Saturday, today when you're watching this, I'll hopefully have this at the market and I'll sell it. If not, you can purchase it from me on Instagram or just shoot me an email. The cost of this painting is $405 USD. And I will also have prints available, canvas prints. So those will be listed to the website next week. If you have interest in this painting, reach out or just wait for the prints to be available through my website, shaydacampbell.com. Very proud of this one. And if you would like to see more acrylic paintings on the channel, let me know in the comments below. As I've said, this is new for me to teach this. I'm going to have to work through more instructions for the mess with it section, but we'll get there. We'll work on it together and we'll get there. And if you are in Stratford, Ontario, Canada this summer, definitely try to come see me at Art in the Park. It's every Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday. I typically go one day a week, so I usually put on Instagram I do put on Instagram when I go down there. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, and there's 70 artists that are part of this market. There's not always 70 people down there, but it is quite a large market. So if you like original paintings, original works, sculpture, all kinds of stuff, check it out if you come to Stratford. Okay, guys, I'm in the messing with it again, just making messy pink brush marks on these flowers, making some messy green marks on the leaves, and just kind of working until I reach a happy place. I'm doing a little bit of mixing right on the canvas board. I find that gives a really nice painterly look that I really love. So the paints don't look flat. I'll kind of go in with a light pink, and if the darker pink is still wet, I allow them to mix and blend a little, and I like the way that looks. But again, these are choices that you make as the artist. You may want to wait for a layer to dry and then layer more paint on top. And that will give you kind of a flatter color, but still very beautiful. Remember, you make the choices. That's how you define your artistic style. Okay, I think I have reached the end with this one. I may spend another moment messing with it, adding just a few more little light pink brush marks, but I'm quite happy with this piece. I like the level of abstraction that I've achieved, but also the level of detail. Just wanted to add a little bit more to the highlight there where I added the porcelain painting. I kind of wanted to still have that, oh yeah, this highlight is still contained there. So just put a little more white, and then I was done. Then I'm totally done messing with it. And as I said, you can buy prints on the website next week. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with a new tutorial.